Thank you so much for being here, and good afternoon. I'm Judge Erica Yu. I'm a judge in Santa Clara County. We have a really precious hour for you that's jam-packed with stellar, just kind of a constellation of superstars. And we're going to start off first with the Chief Justice of the State of California, Supreme Court, Chief Justice Tani Kantil-Sakauwe.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. I want to say how inspired I am and how I am looking forward to hearing from our four presenters who all have very exciting, interesting stories of journey and challenge. And as I look out upon the audience, I know many of you share that journey and challenge. And so I am proud to be part of this, simply to offer welcoming remarks. As you may know, for the Judicial Council, the statewide policy and rulemaking body of the branch of the judiciary, our main goal has been unwavered for the last 20 years. And that goal is access, fairness, and diversity. And when we speak about diversity in the judiciary, we're thinking about diversity writ large. We're talking about gender, we're talking about sexual orientation, we're talking about ethnicity, we're talking about culture, but we're also talking about experience and geography and age, because we know that all of those factors better inform justice, access to justice, the rights of others, representation, and all of those serve as the basis for an independent judiciary that serves all. When I think about diversity and my career, I am grateful for the visionaries who saw the future of California and those of us who look different in it. And by that I mean back in 1984 in the legal field, the pantheons of the judiciary were white men who, when I was 23, looked like they were 80, or probably younger than I am now. But I know that they saw a changing California and they encouraged people like me to be part of it. And I think one of the greatest challenges to diversity is complacency. I would say first that when I think about diversity, what I think about is visibility. I think for many of us in our career now or earlier in our career, what we suffered from was invisibility. We weren't seen. And when we were seen by someone who had the observant eye to even see us in a room, we were sometimes then pegged with unconscious bias or implicit bias by what we looked like. Yet I know that as you sit in your skin in this audience today, as I sit, I don't think of myself as an older aged Asian woman. My head is thinking like yours, objectively, the law, the facts, with humor. But I don't think about what I look like that is projecting who I am, but is being received by unconscious implicit bias. So the first step in diversity is visibility, breaking out and having people observe that the room and the panel and the committee and the school and the leadership must look different in order for us to be fully informed and to get all points of view. So I think what you're going to hear from this panel today is the importance of it. And while we are grateful for the toolkit that the Judicial Council has developed that makes us more aware of where we need to be and where we've come, we still need to know that despite the fact that the judiciary in our percentage of ethnicity of judges and gender far outscore the actual number of lawyers of ethnicity in California, we can never be complacent. We must always look at groups and ask the question, how can this group be better informed with a more diverse membership? And I think you'll hear that today from these fine people who will talk about their struggles and their dreams and their hopes, because all of this contributes to a truly independent judiciary, access to justice, and equal justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. We're so lucky to have Chief Justice Kantil-Sakauwe in California. She's just amazing, and everywhere she goes, statewide, nationally, people are always just amazed, and we're so proud that she's our leader in the courts. I have just some announcements, and then I'd like to introduce the panel. First, if you want MCLE credit, please sign in. Also, please do fill out your evaluation forms, turn off your cell phones, and we'll take questions at the end. Okay? Also, before we start, we'd be remiss if we didn't thank Greg Tanaka, because Greg Tanaka from the Judicial Council put all this together and made it easy for us. We just kind of had to show up, and he prepared all our materials. And then Joanne from CLA has also been instrumental in helping us, and the others from CLA. So now let me introduce our panel. Given that we only have an hour, I'm just going to share one little tidbit about each one, and later in the program they're going to talk about their path, and so you'll learn more about them. First, Judge Diane Macias from the Orange County Superior Court. She was the first person in her family to go to high school and college, and her high school is actually named a legal academy after her. Next to her is retired Justice Martin Jenkins, who's currently the Judicial Appointment Secretary for Governor Newsom. Prior to that, he retired from the California Court of Appeal. And somewhere along the line, he was a professional football player for the Seattle Seahawks. Next to him is Judge Kevin Brazile, who is the presiding judge of Los Angeles County Superior Court, which is the largest court system in California. Judge Brazile is the first African-American PJ in LA, which is an amazing achievement. And then next to him is Diane Bellas. Ms. Bellas is the chair of the Jenny Commission, which is the Judicial Nominee Evaluation Commission of the state of California. Ms. Bellas was the first female public defender in Alameda County, and at the time she was appointed, correct? Not elected?
Yes.
At the time she was appointed, she was only the third female public defender in the state of California. And so again, I'm Erica Yu. I'm in Santa Clara County. I have the great pleasure of having served on what was called at the time the California State Bar Board of Governors. In the year 2000, when I was on the Board of Governors, the State Bar conducted a 20-year survey, and they looked at the diversity in the profession as well as the diversity in the state of California. And what they found was, while California was going to become more and more diverse, there was a disconnect because diversity in the profession was just going down. And so as a result, through many great people, Karen Nobumoto, Chris Areola, and others, the State Bar, Santa Clara County Bar, and other county bars started a pipeline process to ensure that we would continue to have diverse people in the profession as well as on the bench. And then I'm proud to say that the Judicial Council sponsored the first ever conference on judicial diversity in Santa Clara County in San Jose in 2006. And since that time, much has changed. Fabian Nunez, who was the Assembly Speaker, Ms. McGee, Federica McGee, others really worked toward institutionalizing what the Chief Justice talked about, which is recognizing who's here and who should be here. So part of what we're going to do today is talk about the statistics, and Judge Brazile is going to start us off.
So this kind of shows you in terms of the ethnic diversity in California courts. It kind of gives you a breakdown, and the key thing to remember is that it's 66% white Caucasian out of the 1,743 sitting judges in California. Latino, 10.6%, 185, and Asian Pacific Islander is about 7.9%, and then African Americans is 7.7%, or 134. So it's interesting because I'm from the LA Superior Court, and when I look at these numbers, about half of the minority judges are in LA Superior Court because our numbers for each ethnic group is about 65 to 67 judges. So we make up about half, which was interesting. So as you know, there's 58 counties in the state. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of diversity throughout the entire state, because generally what you find is that in terms of diversity on the bench, a lot of times it's centralized in the large counties. For example, Alameda County, Los Angeles County, San Diego County. Not so much some of these smaller counties, but I know there are efforts on the way to make that possible, and we're actually going to talk about that, some programs and some things, resources we have available to improve diversity throughout the entire state. So on the next slide, we just kind of compare it in terms of the census data and how it's borne out. As you can see, Latinos, although they are a large percent of the population, say in 2010 here, 38%, they're only 11% of the judges. So one of the goals that the council has set is that we want to make sure that the judiciary is reflective or mirrors the residents of the state of California. So for Latinos in particular, there's work to be done. African Americans, again, they're faring well as Asian Pacific Islanders. But again, those minority groups are centralized in just a few counties out of the 58. So statewide, there still needs to be more in terms of the diversity push in other counties. And this shows you in the next slide just the diversity by courts. And as you can see from the graph, as I mentioned earlier, Alameda, Los Angeles, San Diego, those are the counties where you see the highest concentrations of diversity judges. However, in some smaller counties, you see none, literally. So again, Martin has a big job ahead of him in terms of picking judges, but we're here to help. We're here to educate. We're here to show people what can be done because we can have diversity in every single county. And so by gender, it's, again, 64% men, 36% women. But if you look at the law schools, in terms of the law school populations, most law schools now, I think the population is half women or more in most of the major law schools. So in about 10 years, that number's going to flip, I think. You're going to see those numbers for women going up. And I know in terms of the appointments that have been occurring over the last several years, women have been just about equal. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future there.
Can I just jump in and say Santa Clara County Superior Court is now at parity? So, yeah, so it's happening.
It is happening. Okay, I know in LA Superior Court, we're not quite there yet, but we're going to get there eventually. And again, when you look at the population of the law schools and in undergrads, colleges, it's primarily women. So let's see, diversity in the courts. I think we show that here. Again, we're looking at the population, 2006, 2010. And again, for women, it's steadily on the increase, which is good. All right? I mean, I think our reflection of our judiciary has to reflect who the state is, and women are a big part of our state. So the process in terms of the pipeline and whether it's not just women, it's minorities, and we'll talk a little bit more about disabled vets. There's a lot of people we want to reach out to, LGBT. Again, diversity in the courts by county. Okay. Again, the larger counties, generally you see the most diversity. Some counties, not so much, but they're smaller. I mean, some counties have like 2 or 3 judges in the entire county. So you have to kind of put that in perspective when you're talking about, well, there are no minorities in those particular counties, but when there's only 2 or 3 or less than 10 judges, it's going to take time and it's hard. But again, we're working on that. I mean, part of what we're doing here, part of this program, is to educate people about diversity and explain why it's important, why it matters, how it makes the judiciary better. So, next, LGBT. You can see the numbers. One of the things for LGBT that I've noticed, because I'm also the co-chair of the Providing Access and Fairness Advisory Committee, is that a lot of people who would qualify as LGBT, when they complete the survey, they don't identify. So we think that there's a large portion it's basically underreporting. So these are the ones who actually report the numbers that you see here, but we believe the numbers are much, much higher. Same thing with veterans. Again, this is a category that needs to change. Again, a lot of times people don't respond, especially with disability. The one thing I want to say about disability is it has not been given enough attention, and we want to focus on it more. Because I just want to tell one story. So in Los Angeles, we're having a commissioner selection process, and where the judges select commissioners. And we had a workshop, kind of like a judicial summit, but for just those people applying to be commissioners. And we had standing room only. We had almost 300 people in the room. And there was one lawyer who was in a wheelchair. And I mentioned, just by mentioning the fact that, as part of our process, we wanted diversity and we wanted disability. And he came up to me afterwards and said, just the fact that I mentioned the disability lawyers, he had tears in his eyes. So that really struck me that, we've got work to do, and diversity covers everybody. Okay. All right.
Okay, thank you so much. So we're going to shift now, and I'm glad that Judge Brazile told a story, because in a way we thought it would be useful for us to share some of our stories about how people got to the bench. I'm hoping some of you in the room want to go on the bench, and also it's just so important that you're here in this room, because you're going to be hearing from Justice Jenkins and Ms. Bellas, and you're going to be able to take the information and share it with your communities so that we can fill that pipeline and keep getting people interested in a career. I have to say, I used to say being a lawyer was the best job in the world, because it was like you were a Renaissance person. You could learn enough about things through experts, deconstruct it, tell the jury and judge, and go on and learn something else. But I was wrong. Being a judge is better, so we want all of you to think about that and recruit people. So in terms of recruiting people, could you please share your story about how you got onto the bench? Would you like to start?
Certainly. First of all, hello everyone and welcome. My name's Elizabeth Guerrero Macias, and I'm an Orange County Superior Court judge, and I actually serve in the Central Justice Center, which is located in Santa Ana, California, mostly referred to as Santa Ana. I grew up in that community, and it was really great when I first was appointed to be able to look across the way to Eddie Westfield, which was the football stadium where, when I was in high school and I would participated in tall flags, that I was in that stadium. My journey to the bench started probably given my community activism at a very young age. And I didn't know at the time that it was community activism. I think my mom just called it a lot of complaining and said, you should be a lawyer. But the fact of the matter is, I grew up under very difficult life circumstances. My father worked at a factory, and he lost his job after sustaining a back injury, and he had to keep up with the work that was given to him, and it would keep getting increased so that eventually they'd be able to terminate him, and terminate them they did. And so he became a gardener, and I often tell people that I like to be introduced as the gardener's daughter, because even though my father is now retired, it's the way that he put food on the table and kept a roof over our head. And there were many times where we lived in a garage that was converted into living room, dining room, bedroom, and we at one point lived in one of those campers that you attach to a truck, but there was no truck attached to that camper. So it was not easy, and I didn't see people that looked like me in positions of authority. In fact, once I asked my mother if she would go to the thrift store and buy a suit for me, and it was career day, and she said, we'll go look. And I showed up in my suit, and people said, well, who are you? And I said, I'm the school receptionist, because that was the woman that looked like me, was so nice, and she just looked so refined and so different from the type of person that I saw in my community, most of them doing manual labor. I flunked second grade. I used to not share that, but it was on the Daily Journal, so at this point I've given up on hiding that. And it was mostly because an education wasn't a priority in my family. We overstayed every time that we went to Mexico during the summer, during spring break, any kind of break that we got, we'd run back to Mexico. My parents didn't understand the importance of an education and how it would potentially change my future. I will also say that when I was in elementary school, there were times where I struggled significantly, but I refused to give up. And I remember in 5th grade, seeing students leave the classroom and wondering where they were going and inquiring. And they said that they were going to an advanced reading class and asking, well, how do I get to the advanced reading class? I didn't have parents that could help me with my homework. My father had a 3rd grade education. My mother had a 6th grade education. So what I did is I would just read. And every time that you needed to submit one book report, I'd submit 2 or 3. Were they perfect? No, I'm certain that they were not. But I wanted to show them that I was willing to do the work. And so eventually I got into an advanced reading class. I got into the gifted and talented education program. They sent me to go get tested. I never passed the test. I didn't grow up doing puzzles. My mind just wasn't wired that way. And when they tried to kick me out of that class, my mother went to school and said if she can do the work, she should remain in that classroom. And so that's the reason why I continued to be able to press on in terms of my education. And if it wasn't because of that, I saw kids that I grew up with in my neighborhood tracked a certain way. And because I was in the gifted and talented classes, I was tracked in a different way. And I absolutely struggled all along, but I was unwilling to give up. I can tell you in high school I had a teacher in my advanced reading, my English class, which is an AP class, look to about 5 of her students and say, I'm going to be focusing on them because I think they can pass the test. And the rest of us, you just do what you need to do. I don't think you can pass the test. And I remember at some point during that class where she said, one day you are all going to come back and thank me. And I wondered, here's an adult telling me that I can't pass a test, but one day I'm going to come back and thank her. So, sometimes it just really takes the shifting of someone's mind and brain to understand what they're communicating to students. When I was in college, I remember coming across one of my teachers in elementary school when I went to go pick up my brother, and I was told by that teacher, I was asked by that teacher, are you married and do you have children? And I remember asking her, I said, if you had come across Mary, someone else in my class who was thriving, would you have asked her if she was married and had children, or would you ask her, what college are you attending? And I said, and I leave that with you because you're shaping young minds. So I note that we have limited time, but I can say that all along I've had personal struggles. When I was in law school, I married my high school sweetheart. He actually lived one house down. And I got married in July, started law school in August. I was pregnant by December, and I got through my first year of law school pregnant. And I can tell you that there probably were a lot of bets that I couldn't make it through. But I think that one thing that I communicate with students and law students also is that those struggles that you've had in life, you need to channel, because you're going to find motivation and you're going to find the energy and the spirit to keep going and not give up and let others define you.
Thank you so much, Judge Macias. We started late, so we might go a little bit late, and I apologize in advance. Justice Jenkins?
Thank you, Erica. It's a pleasure to be here, and I welcome all of you this afternoon. So, talking about the path to the bench, just as Judge Macias indicated, for me it runs through formative years, and I'll just be very, very brief. I never thought about being a lawyer. Obviously, I never thought about being a judge. My father was a janitor. He worked for the city and county of San Francisco, and he had 4 jobs. The day job was just one. And I remember my first exposure to lawyers was he cleaned the offices of a very prestigious silk stocking law firm in downtown San Francisco. He would go in on Friday and Saturday nights and clean the offices, and he took his 2 boys with him. And on one evening, we went and walked into the offices and walked into the conference room, and it looked like a hurricane that hit this room. There were handprints pressing food on windows. It was dirty. There was garbage everywhere. And I looked across the room, and I think I was 10, and I said, Daddy, they were partying so hard, they left a bottle of alcohol. And I walked over to it, and the name on the bottle was Glenlivet. I had never seen Glenlivet. I had no idea. I didn't know what it was. And he looked at me and said, Son, they did not leave that bottle or forget that bottle. They deposited it where they did so that they could feel better about this mess they've left. And I'm training you boys. That's why I bring you with me. That dignity is your calling card. You treat people with dignity, no matter what their station in life. And when you get to where you're going, I want you to remember that bottle of scotch. So that was the man who raised me. He sent me off to Santa Clara University, and you heard I played a little football, a little bit, not so very well. But the football coach there at Santa Clara, an Irish Catholic man, decided one day that Jenkins, who wanted to be a school teacher and coach high school football, should be a lawyer, as he was team captain and he had good grades. And then he invited his friend, who just passed away last night, who had just been nominated to the district court in San Francisco, a guy named Gene Lynch, down to practice to meet me. That led to a job after law school at USF in the district attorney's office. That led to a job in the Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, trying Klan conspiracies, racial violence cases, excessive force cases across the country in federal courts. And I saw judges and appeared in front of them who couldn't spell dignity. And one day, when I came back and working for the phone company, I get a call from Justice Carol Corrigan. And on the same day, a call from a gentleman named Dale Manami, who both said, we were having lunch today in different places, and your name kept coming up as somebody who'd make a good judge. You've got civil experience and criminal experience and federal experience and administrative law experience. And I said, I don't like judges. I don't have anything good to say about most of them. They make my life difficult. A year later, after I lost a summary judgment motion, I thought the judge had completely screwed it up. I said, I think I can be a judge. I say all that to say that our formative years, the experiences we've had, that bottle of Glenlivet Scotch, the chief mentioned visibility. It was important for me to decide to become a judge, to project myself into that job, and I didn't see anybody who looked like me until I saw a Ming Chen. I see him sitting here today, and an Alan Broussard. That was vital, that the picture, the mental image I had about the person who sits in a black robe could look like me and have a background like mine. And so it is important. Diversity isn't just a word. It is a calling. It is significant to the development of the rule of law. And that's all I'll say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justice Jenkins. Judge Brazile?
Sure. So my parents were from New Orleans in the South back in the 50s. And they came to California, like a lot of African Americans did, to escape the prejudice, the lack of opportunity that occurred in the South in the late 50s. And I was actually born here in Los Angeles, and then I had a younger sister who was born after me, and then I had two older brothers and an older sister who were born in New Orleans. So my father had never gone to college. My mother had never gone to college. I was the first in my family to go to college. Growing up, it was my two parents and 5 of us kids in a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house. I tell that story to my son, and he thinks I'm lying that that a house only had 1 bathroom. I go, it is true. I will show it to you. And so I grew up in an area in South Central Los Angeles, not far, if you remember the Watts riots in the late 60s, early mid-60s. So, and there was a lot of gangs. And I was kind of bullied and kind of abused by the gangs. So my parents made a decision to move out of that neighborhood and to move to a better area called Culver City. I don't know if any of you have ever been there in downtown Los Angeles, Southern California. And at the time, the school district was predominantly white Caucasian. So when I went there, out of 600 students in the 9th grade, when I came, I was the only African American. So it was interesting because people hadn't seen an African American up close. And the funny thing about it, I always remember, is how they always would want to touch my hair. Because I had a bigger afro then than I do now.
So did I.
Right, see? So I didn't mind when the girls touched it, but when the guys touched it, it was like, whoa, wait, just back off. So in high school, I didn't really apply myself because it wasn't something that was encouraged, because my mother was a homemaker, my father worked 2 jobs, and I can remember, this is where Martin and I have similarities. You never know what similarities you find in people. My father was a janitor at a middle school, and then he got a second job where he worked at the airlines just loading bags. And then he had a little side business of janitorial, and he would go in offices, and me and my other brothers, we would go and help him on the weekends to clean those offices, and a lot of times they were law offices. And I can remember that vividly because he worked 2 jobs, so the only time we saw him is when we went to the janitor job. And then he got a better job where he became a gardener for Caltrans. And my mother never worked, and we were poor, but we didn't know it because we had so much love in our family. And when I graduated from high school, my parents went through a very bitter divorce. So I had an older brother who was a sheriff deputy. And he'd been in the Marines, he joined the sheriff's department, and he became a bailiff. And he would tell me stories about what he would see in court, in terms of the lawyers he got to know, in terms of what the judges did. And he got to know a lot of public defenders, because most of the African-American lawyers were public defenders back in those days, back in the early 80s, late 70s. So I got to meet some of his friends who were public defenders. And they told me about the law, and I didn't really apply myself very well in high school. I had the distinction of graduating from Culver City High School with the lowest GPA. So I went straight to a community college because no college would give me a chance. With SAT, that was out of the question. So I had to decide, and my parents both said, because they were going through a divorce, we love you, but we cannot help you. Either you can go to school or you can go to the military. So my other brother said, you can do better and go to community college. I went to community college for 2 years, and I transferred to UCLA. I did well there, and then I was fortunate enough to get into UCLA Law School. And by that time, I realized it was my family that supported me. My 2 older brothers, my older sisters, and they were the ones who encouraged me because they had never gone to college. Nobody in the family had gone to college. We didn't know any lawyers. We didn't know any doctors. We really didn't know any professionals. But the people that my brother introduced me to kept giving me encouragement. And quite frankly, I didn't have the belief that I could do it, but these other people kept telling me to do this. And one thing I've learned over the years is somebody has to believe in you, oftentimes for you to believe in yourself. So when I graduated from law school, I passed the bar, and I went to the county counsel's office. And the county counsel's office at that time didn't even start to hire women. The office had been around for close to 70 years. They didn't start hiring women until the late 70s. So I recall Joan Dempsey Klein, who was on the Court of Appeal. I appeared on appeal once, and she looked, and she said, "You're from the county counsel's office? Okay, an African-American male?" She was astonished. And this is during the oral argument. She stopped and said that to me. That's why I remember it so vividly. And she went on. I saw her at an event later, and she said she could not get hired by the office because she was a woman. So, I went to the office, and then there were a lot of people there, again, who supported me, who mentored me, who nurtured me, and said, "You know what? We want to see you go further." And again, it was people believing in me so I could believe in myself. And I'm so grateful for all the people who I met at county council. And one was an African-American attorney there who became what's called a division chief. But he actually had to sue the county council's office for racial discrimination to get that spot. Wow. And he won. And he's one of my best friends, Richard Townsend. And he just kind of, again, mentored me, helped me, supported me. And then when I decided to be a judge, it was the county council, Bill Pellman, who told me, "You can do this. I believe in you. You have what it takes." And the biggest support for me to become a judge is when other judges told me, "You can be a judge. You should be a judge." So one of the things I tell my colleagues frequently is we have an obligation to, one, identify people of all races who can be judges, and to encourage them, to mentor them, to support them. Because that's what I had. And it wasn't until a judge, and several judges told me, "You should do this, you should pursue this," that I believed it in my own mind that it could happen. So one of the reasons why diversity is such a passion of mine is because I see so many people out there who, what we call the pipeline, whether they're in high school, middle school, college, law school, who are looking for someone to show them or to tell them that, yes, you can do it. That's why we tell our stories. okay? Because your stories, oftentimes people realize they have a connection with you. And so the janitor in my family, my father, I heard Martin talk about his father and being a janitor at an event we held. And the thing about it was different for me is Martin spoke about it with such pride. And it took me a long time to get to that point, to have the pride that, well, my father was a janitor or my father was a gardener. Because when I went to college, people would talk about their parents and, well, they were a doctor or they were a lawyer or they had a business. And, you know, I was kind of shy about saying, well, my father was a gardener or, you know, I used to help him clean buildings. But now, when I look back on it and I look at what he instilled in me and the role model he set for me, you know, I can proudly say my father was a janitor. My father was a gardener. My mother was a homemaker, because they are the reason I am here. I'm sitting here now.
Thank you, Judge Brazile.
Yeah.
And Diane, Ms. Bellas has been kind enough to say she wanted to cede her time and not share her story so that we could talk more about the process. One thing Judge Brazile said is really important, that you need the support of others. So different minority bar associations, or my county, for example, Santa Clara County, there's groups of people who will help other people get on the bench. So in Santa Clara County, there's a group of us that will do mock interviews, so that when people are going through their Jenny interview or their interview with the governor's appointment secretary, we kind of put them through their paces. The minority bar associations do that. Women lawyers presents So You Want to Be a Judge presentation. So look for those, and those are places where you can get some information, some advice, and some practice. And so, Ms. Bellas, thanks so much for your forbearance and your patience. And I was wondering if you could please talk about the Jenny Commission. How does one become a commissioner? What does the commission do? And what advice would you give?
I would be happy to do that. Thank you, Judge Yu, and hello, everyone. Judge Yu requested that I speak very briefly about how our commission is formulated. There are 38 of us, and we are each appointed by the State Bar Board of Trustees, who select from a pool of applicants, and those applicants apply through the State Bar website. Our statutory objective is to have a commission mirroring the great diversity of our state, and in the words of our Chief Justice, that involves diversity writ large. If I may have your permission to quote you forevermore, I would appreciate that. We are composed of public members, retired judges, retired justices, and attorneys from all regions in the state and from a myriad of practice sectors and practice areas. Our mission, our overarching mission, is to build and sustain an evaluation process that promotes equity and fairness in the selection process. We answer to our statutory mandate, which requires us to evaluate within a 90-day period all candidates for judicial office whose names come to us through Justice Jenkins' office, the governor's office. We serve 3 successive one-year terms and a 4th if one is in the position of chair. We meet 6 or 7 times annually for a period of 2 days, each meeting. Many times people believe that service on Jenny is one avenue to the bench, but I would discourage anyone from looking at that as the only avenue, since it requires an investment of somewhere between 500 to 1,000 hours a year, in addition to whatever else you might have on your plate. It is a remarkable experience to serve with people who are so willing to engage mindfully and fairly in a process that really enriches our benches throughout the state. And as I was mentioning earlier, I've had a long career, but nothing, no single thing that I have ever undertaken has changed me as much as my Jenny service has. We spend hours and hours looking at people, assessing their characters, assessing their professional skill sets, evaluating their suitability for the bench. At a certain point, we turn the mirror around, and most of us have to look at ourselves through those same lenses. Through a long career, we become very busy and often don't have the time to engage in that kind of self-examination. But it is a requisite for participating on the Jenny Commission, and I believe it is also really essential that one do that before even thinking about submitting an application for appointment to the court. I don't want to take too much time, so I thought I can communicate to you in 2 words what your lodestar should be through the application process. And those words are, what if? Start asking yourself that question when you pull that application, the PDQ, up online. Ask yourself, what if someone reads this? Because in fact, 38 commissioners will read it before it's submitted, will read it, and in fact, the governor's office and Justice Jenkins have already read it. Look at that PDQ carefully. Ask, as Justice Jenkins has said, answer the call of the question. It's very important that you answer the call of the question candidly and honestly, because what you say about yourself will form the first impression that we all have of you as a candidate. Think of it as the first look, the first meeting, the first dance, if you will. And before you hit the send button, ask yourself the next important what if question. What if I actually am appointed to become a judge? What might I be called upon to do? And do I want to do that? Do you want to do asbestos cases for 2 years? Do you want to deal with the wrenching human drama in the family law or criminal courts? Do you want to send people to prison? Do you want to release people from custody? What if I am appointed to the bench? What might I be called upon to do, and do I want to do that? If the answer is I'm willing to do that, I would suggest that you examine further your desires. If you want to undertake that difficult, demanding, and valuable work, then do hit the send button. One of the most important questions that we examine as Jenny Commissioners is why someone wishes to become a bench officer. I have heard many candidates say that it seemed like a logical next step. But sometimes a step can be off a cliff, and sometimes it can be a step onto a platform in the Winchester Mystery House. Think about the fact that it's more than a step, it's a gigantic leap. Because moving from a life of advocacy to a life of neutrality is an enormous change that can be difficult for many practitioners. And then finally, think of what if that question, the Jenny Commission will ask, what if this person is appointed to the bench? Anticipate areas of concern for the commission. Probably in 2/3 of the investigations we undertake, we develop negative information about a candidate that comes to us through various raters who provide substantial and corroborated information about a candidate. You'll be given notice of that information. It's not unusual. Many people are appointed to the bench who have addressed negative information that the Jenny Commission has brought to their attention. The important thing is that you work toward developing self-insight and awareness, that you take ownership of any missteps that you might have taken. They're common to all of us. And then finally ask, what if I am faced with a hard decision on matters about which I have no expertise? What will I do? The answer to that question, what will I do, is another way of telling the Commission who you are. And that is our ultimate undertaking, to figure out who you are. That's what Justice Jenkins expects from us, and that's why we put the time in to this work.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bellas. So, Justice Jenkins, how do you get nominated to the Jenny Commission? Can you please talk about that process, and are there things that you're looking for? Justice Jenkins?
To the Jenny Commission?
Yeah, so I'm not sure people know, how do people's names get nominated to the Jenny Commission?
Okay.
Sorry about that.
So what happens is once, and let me just say, I have never heard a better dissertation on the process one should undertake before you hit that send button than I just heard. Just excellent. I hope you took good notes on that because she covered it from A to Z. Thank you very much. So once you hit that send button, the application travels in cyberspace to my office in Sacramento, and they're logged in. And I have 350 applications currently, and I've read 250. I read every one of them. And then once that happens, I have set up, with the governor's approval, 8 regional vetting committees. And so there is one in Northern California, there's the Bay Area, there is one obviously in Los Angeles, since they have most of the judicial spots, I think, some 500 or so?
Mm-hmm. 12 vacancies right now, by the way.
Oh, really?
If you were wondering.
But you just sent me 10 texts in the last 10 days telling me that. That's for their edification, right?
Yeah. I just want the audience to know.
Okay. So those vetting committees then receive the applications, and my whole goal in the initial review is to look at the experience, to look at the character, to look at the rationale for why you want to become a judge. And if those line up with the governor's profile, which is the following, he's looking for people who are very intelligent, but not necessarily abstract intelligence, the kind of intelligence that has a practical aspect to it so that you can think in the abstract but then come down out of the 10,000-foot tree and explain it to people in real time, boots on the ground. He's looking for people of intellect, of integrity, people with broad community experience. That can encompass bar activities. It can encompass working with the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts. He's looking for people with a solid work ethic. Sometimes I think lawyers perceive that judges have these cushy jobs and they're from 9 to 5 and the lights go out and you go home. Au contraire, that is not what this job is about. I've seen the chief's lights on at 8 p.m. at night, a day or two before an argument, and she's beating the midnight oil, breaking. So he's looking for people with a good work ethic. He's looking for diversity in general, in all of its forms, and a word that's an adjunct to that is inclusiveness, inclusion. It's a very broad undertaking view, perspective of who should populate the bench in California. And his number one and most important criteria, all the others must be in place, humility. Because as he told me, humility is the conduit through which courage and integrity, community experience vents itself. Humility ensures that decisions are not just someone's burgeoning ego, but there's a tie to the way the decision affects real people in their daily lives. So that's the profile, and if that profile is there, I send it to the JSACs, the regional committees. They look at these applications without any eye toward politics. They're cataloging community service, but they're not making decisions about how much community service is necessary. It doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. There's not any political perspective brought to bear on how these regional committees evaluate candidates. They look at the profile, they call opposing counsel, they call references, and they use the same nomenclature that Jenny uses to evaluate candidates, which is you are either exceptionally well qualified, qualified, or not qualified. And Judge Macias right here sits on the Orange County vetting committee, and I see her nodding her head, and I told her to do so that she's corroborating exactly what I'm telling you. Once the local vetting committee then ranks candidates, it comes back to me. I take a look at the notes I made when I send it out to see whether there's corroboration or some dissonance. I may make some calls, and then we send to Jenny only individuals that we're serious about appointing. And those names then go, to answer your question, to the Jenny Commission. They go to Diane. Sometimes she pushes back and says, you sent too many.
Uh-oh.
And she must be obeyed, so I take some names off. That's how they're nominated.
Thank you so much. So, are there any do's or don'ts, Justice Jenkins or Ms. Bellas, any advice you would give people to avoid? Sometimes people wonder, how many letters of recommendation should I get? What kind of letters of recommendation should I get?
So, in the letters of reference, here's the thing. Even as a judge, the judges in a room know that you get letters of reference all the time. In the first paragraph, I can tell whether the writer knows the candidate. And that's a real turnoff when it's clear to me they don't. And there are some people who think the way to go at this is to get 30 letters of reference. You just blanket the community. And I would say that's not the way to go at this. Quality over quantity. It doesn't necessarily have to be all judges or lawyers. It can be someone from your community who really knows, can speak to your integrity and your character and your values. That is as important as someone who can evaluate your legal skills. So it's a balance that you're trying to affect. Quality, not quantity. So I'd say that with references. Just a few other things that I have noticed already. Before you hit send, have somebody else read the application. Typos may seem like it's hyper-technical, but they're distracting when you're reading 250 applications. And so let someone clean it up for you. I'm a terrible proofreader. I found that out early in my career, so I made sure somebody on my staff did that well. It's okay to be humble enough to admit that to yourself. I would also say temperament issues. You should have a good sense of how people feel about your temperament, which meant you spent some time asking people, can you see me in this job, and why? Because those people are going to be contacted. How have you walked in the world? Not just a super intellect that you have and the ability to analyze legal issues. That's a part of the job. It's not all of the job. I would also say be wary of embellishing. So I was reading an application the other day, and a gentleman talked about his amazing appellate practice. He's an appellate specialist, and he's appeared before the California Supreme Court and the Ninth Circuit on many occasions. And when I got to drill down, one amicus brief in the Ninth Circuit, one writ petition in the Supreme Court. Embellishment is your enemy. Just be honest with what you've done, and other people will speak in glowing terms about who you are.
Thank you. Ms. Bellas?
I would like to underscore that 3 times. The word that we continually use at our Jenny meetings is candor. That comes up in our reports. It comes up during our discussions. It's extremely important. Additionally, when you're applying, this is no time to become a different person. We'll be able to figure out who you actually are. So if you have, in the last year and a half, joined community organizations, suddenly become a member of the Inn of Court, become active or somewhat active, or sent $200 off to a bar association, that will not impress anyone, because it's very evident. We can tell from the timeline that on such and such a date, 1 year and a half ago, you decided to apply to become a judge. You need to really be yourself. Oftentimes people worry about that. I haven't had any particular community service because I was taking care of my children, one of whom had medical issues. That's real. That actually happens in life. We understand that. communicate that if you feel that it's important. If there are gaps in your resume or in your community service, explain why. Don't try to fill in the gaps to make yourself or your application look beautiful to us. There's beauty there already, but ferret it out for yourself.
Okay, I have one last question, and it's when I put in my application, a little while later I received a business-size envelope that was super thick, and I thought, oh, this is kind of going to be a really bad rejection letter, and I opened it up, and it was actually my credit history from the age of 18 onward till 40 when I applied. So I was wondering, what kind of background investigation is done of a candidate, Justice Jenkins?
We do, at a certain point in the process, seek credit information, I think for rather obvious reasons. But most of it, to be quite honest with you, and we work with the State Bar. If there are issues of discipline and things of that nature, we try to get access to that information to see about the ultimate resolution, because obviously that becomes material and relevant in the determination about whether you receive the appointment. But most of the background check is really done by our JSACs, that is the regional vetting committees, and also the Jenny Commission. We rely quite heavily. And because I'm an old man and I've been out here for 30 years and I've made friends across the state, I have a lot of contacts in high places and even some low places, and I can call people and get information that is relevant to the process.
Thank you. I'm sort of curious if that process includes looking at people's social media content.
I am technologically challenged, and so I don't even have a Facebook account. But that gives me an idea. I probably should hire some young folks who know how to do that kind of thing.
Thank you so much. So we have one more topic to talk about, and that's about the Judicial Council's Diversity Toolkit, which the Chief Justice mentioned, and Judge Brazile will talk about that. And then we're going to go to each person and ask them if they have some burning issue or last thoughts to share, and then we'll go to your questions. Go ahead, Judge Brazile.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So I just want to, I'll be brief because I know we're short for time, but the Judicial Council's long-range strategic plan for the judicial branch, goal number 1 is access, fairness, and diversity. So this kind of ties into the Judicial Toolkit. So let me just give you a little bit of background. In 2006, there was a judicial summit on diversity sponsored by the State Bar of California, the California Judges Association, and a number of bar groups. And as a result of that summit, the first Judicial Diversity Toolkit was created back in 2010, and it was called Pathways to Achieving Judicial Diversity in California Courts. And so it was an online resource for people who were interested in mentoring programs, diversity programs, learning more about the pipeline. So in 2011, the Judicial Council recommended that the Diversity Toolkit be the foundation for doing what we call community outreach to underrepresented groups, to minority groups, and to work on the pipeline. And so when I talk about the pipeline, I'm talking about high schools, colleges, law schools, because that's where it starts. When we talk about building diversity and reaching out and making sure we have inclusion, it starts really in elementary school, high school, as people progress. As I said earlier about my own experience, I didn't even know who a lawyer was until I was in college. So if you want to capture somebody and get them motivated to become a lawyer or a judge, it starts usually in high school. So that's when we talk about the pipeline. It goes all the way through. So in 2012, that's when the council decided, okay, this will be the foundation for our outreach programs, following on, which was a recommendation made by the 2011 Judicial Diversity Summit. So in this year, 2019, we decided let's upgrade the toolkit, and I want to thank the chief for her leadership in direction on this. She made it a priority, which was really important, and so we formed a work group along with the State Bar's Council on Access and Fairness. Also, there's what's called the Providing Access and Fairness Judicial Advisory Committee for the Judicial Council. I happen to be one of the co-chairs. So we put together a work group, and there were 10 of us involved, And over the last 8-9 months, we worked on upgrading the prior toolkit, design, the web page, what it would look like, kind of basically what you see there. And just last month, the toolkit went online, and it's actually on the Judicial Council website. And there's a diversity network page, so we have a listserv. I did a presentation to the Trial Court Presiding Judges Advisory Committee back in August, and we also did a survey with all the trial court presiding judges to find out what kind of diversity programs they have, what kind of inclusion programs they're interested in, what's happening in terms of dates so people know if there is a program, a judicial summit or a judicial workshop, where it is and how to find out about it. So we put all that information on the diversity toolkit. And basically what it is, it's a resource. We were really focusing on something that's user-friendly, easy access, and to give out information. So I think one of the things I'm very proud about is the listserv page, so that people can find out what is out there, not only in, say, LA or Alameda, but throughout the entire state. So that's what the toolkit does. We've got a very good introduction that the chief gave about the toolkit. And Greg, I don't know if you can just maybe demonstrate it just a bit for us.
Sure. Did you want to talk about the court survey?
Sure. Yeah, and then we also did a survey with the presiding judges. We did that back in August, so they've been sending in their survey responses, basically telling us about diversity programs that they're doing in their various counties, what they're doing with law schools, what they're doing with high schools, because again, that's where it really starts. And one of the callings I have to all my judicial colleagues, and I say this quite often, is it's time for us to roll up our sleeves and get out there. We have to get out in the community. We have to get out in the high schools. We have to get out in the law schools. We have to get out in the bar associations and encourage their members to apply. We have to be mentors. We have to identify those people. We see lawyers every day in court and identify those who we think could be good judicial candidates. And it's a process. I mean, I applaud the chief. I've seen her at middle schools. I've seen her at high schools. I've seen her at law schools. I'm just trying to keep up with her in some way. But it's really a full-time job in the sense of community outreach that we as judges have to do, because that's really what it takes to make diversity happen, to get to inclusion. And so I'm up to the task. I'm encouraging people. I'm telling people, believe it, because we're going to make it happen.
Thank you so much, Judge Brazile. Thank you so much, Judge Brazile. So as Judge Brazile mentioned, and I mentioned, the first diversity conference was in 2006. There was one in 2011. The council is committed to do it about every 5 years. And what's really fascinating about it is it's like a think tank where people can look at issues of diversity in our judicial branch. And even now we're looking at paths to advancement so the Superior Court judges can get elevated. And are women and minorities really getting trial court assignments that are preventing that, because women and minorities sometimes are being assigned to juvenile or family, and maybe those assignments haven't had the luster that maybe felony trials would have, and so maybe that's a barrier to advancement. So these are just really wonderful convenings where people can really explore these issues. Before we get to, probably only have time for 1 or 2 questions, I'm going to ask if there's just any final words. Ms. Bellas?
Thank you. I offer you this perspective. As lawyers, we're highly competitive people. We're hardwired to be competitive. But please don't think about the judicial application process as a competitive undertaking. It actually isn't. This is about you demonstrating your qualifications for judicial office. This is about demonstrating to the commission and to the governor's office that you would make an outstanding bench officer. You stand alone in that regard, and please approach the process in that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Judge Brazile?
For the lawyers, I would say if you're thinking about doing it, do it. Work with bar groups. They can be very helpful. Talk to judges that you know. I can't agree more. You really want to take some time on that application, because basically that's all they see of you is that application. So that should really be your best work. So things like typos and grammar, and I think it was pointed out earlier, candor and honesty are so very important. And then I think for all of us, my message is be a mentor, be a support, help somebody else. That makes the profession better, makes you better. People helped me. I had a village that supported me, so be part of somebody's village.
Thank you. Justice Jenkins?
Just a couple of things. The flip side. What's the upside of this job? Here's the upside for me. It is a job with an amazing learning curve, but that learning curve then has the benefit of a process that you will never, ever outkick your coverage. You will learn something new every day. The second thing about this job that I think is equally as amazing is that you will never walk out of the courthouse without being able to say to yourself, I really made a difference in somebody's life today. That's not common to most jobs, most disciplines. I've been fortunate enough to give talks all over the world, Australia, Africa, London, Paris, and I've gone to talk about the independence of the judiciary and trial skills and development of trial skills. And I know that our system is the envy, our court system is the envy of the world. Everyone looks to the United States. And the bulwark of our court system are state courts. And the crown jewel of state courts is the California judiciary. And the last thing I will say, I think my Jesuit training in my philosophy class, when we read the Apology, where Socrates is giving his summation, he talks about the unexamined life not being worth living. You will truly have an examined life, because to do this job right, you have to learn about yourself, your bias, your strengths, your weaknesses. You have to move them out the way to do the job, to mete out justice. And if those 4 planks sound interesting to you, hit the push button.
Thank you. Judge Macias?
First of all, how do you follow that, right? I want to start off by thanking the Chief Justice as well as Judicial Council and Justice Jenkins for the work that they're doing in terms of diversity and inclusivity. I will say that I'm probably speaking to some people that are not in this room because I think that people don't realize that they are deserving of a judicial appointment. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done. It starts certainly at the elementary school level, because I think that that's where you start to learn that homework is important, that showing up to school is important, that having study skills is important. And we certainly have to be empowering our high school students. And I often talk to students in law school, and I like to say that, you know, we like to pat ourselves on the back and look at the increase in the number of diversity, whether it's gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation. But the fact of the matter is we didn't help them get there. And we need to start thinking about how it is that we help them to get there, how it is that we help them get through law school, because law school is not easy, how it is that we help them to make certain that they're making the right choices once they are attorneys so that they can apply to a judicial position and that they can see themselves as judges. I can honestly say that I applied because I was on the board of the Latina Lawyer Bar Association, and we started complaining about the fact that there were not enough Latinos on the bench. And I'm not one to complain if we're not going to do something about it. And I said, well, let's apply. I think I was actually the only one that applied. And I remember hearing from people say, you know, I don't know that the governor is going to appoint someone like you. And someone like me meant that I went to Cal State Fullerton and meant that I went to California Western. It was an Ivy League. And the fact of the matter is, I often told people whenever they said no to me, it's, well, they don't know my story. I'm going to share my story with them. There is value in that. They saw the fact that I brought strength and that I brought integrity and that I brought humility to the job. And so we need to make certain that we get that message out. So there's a lot of work to be done.
And thank you so much. I just share a short story. Diversity is not just important for the bench and for the bar and for the litigants in the courtroom, but it has real meaning for people who just see the courts and they have more trust and confidence. So when I was appointed, I was the first Asian female in my court, and there was a lot of press coverage. I was also on the State Bar Board of Governors, so I was trying to wrap up my work, and I was traveling a lot to Los Angeles. I was appointed October 2nd, 2001, so right after September 11th. And so I was flying, and there was nobody in the airport. Then I was walking around, and some lady, a little Asian lady who worked in the store at the airport said, I saw you yesterday. And I said, oh, I've been flying a lot, but I'm sorry, that was someone else. I wasn't here yesterday. She said, no, I saw someone who looks just like you, and she was on TV, and she's going to be a judge. And I said, oh, that was me, And so we had a nice conversation. She told me about her immigration to the United States. She made me guess her age. She, told me about her marital issues, and I was like, oh, okay, thank you. And then as we chatted, she said, no wonder they made you judge. Your English is so good. And I said, thank you so much. And then she said, this shows Chinese can learn English, Chinese can become lawyer, Chinese can become judge. And I said, yes, it does. So diversity really is something that's so important. So we've gone over time. I think we have time, maybe no questions. I'm so sorry. Some of us will stay to answer your questions. And thank you so much for staying with us to the end and being with us. And thank you so much, Chief.